Welcome to Mesquite ISD's brand new podcast, Let's Talk, a nod to the new Leadership and Empowerment Team, LET. My name is Ted Madden, and I work for the Communications Department.
And I'm Daniel Norwood, Social Studies Coordinator for the district. We established the Leadership and Empowerment Team with the goal of knocking down any racial, cultural, or gender-related obstacles to ensure our students have the most equitable learning environments to become the leaders they want to be.
Every week, we'll spend 20 to 30 minutes discussing what the district as a whole is doing to achieve this goal, and then what is happening on campuses, in schools, and even inside classrooms to better serve our students. It's our first show, so let's start at the top with our superintendent, Dr. David Vroonland. And because we are discussing issues involving race and gender, and because you can't see us in this podcast, I think it's important we establish who we are. I'm a 47-year-old white man.
I'm a 38-year-old black man.
I hate to say my age, but I'm a 56-year-old white man.
Yeah, that's going to be the hiccup every week, is this part right here. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, Dr. V. Let's start broadly. How did the Leadership and Empowerment Team begin, and what are we trying to do?
Well, so it actually came out of the unfortunate death of George Floyd and the circumstances that surrounded that following that. And I've been, as you noted, I'm 56 years old, so I was born in 1964. But as a young man, I didn't understand the civil rights movement at all of the 60s. I was too young, not aware of those things, but obviously studied them. But what I pointed out to the group as we gathered was I have been a part of at least 5 incidents like this in my lifetime as an adult. I'm all starting in 1990, 91. And so for me, what was deeply concerning as I watched how the death of George Floyd kind of exploded across the scene in America was it looked just so hauntingly familiar. And the way in which things transpired and the way in which people spoke. And it just kind of hurt my heart to see that we haven't transformed and really at the heart level. One could argue there have been a lot of policy changes over that time. But in terms of how mindsets have shifted, in terms of how hearts have been affected, in terms of how leadership has moved us forward, I was deeply concerned. And so I wrote to our community, and what I expressed then and what I mean sincerely now is our efforts as we look at this circumstance in the United States as it relates to racial equity issues and biases is how do we move it past the patterns of old? And how do we really start exploring new ways at which we can change mindsets and behaviors and therefore change the culture of a people, if you will? For us, the culture of a people is targeted to Mesquite ISD. Obviously, at a large scale, that's much more complicated than what we're dealing with, but even at our level, that can be very complicated. And so that was the beginning of the process. And so I turned to Mr. Norwood and a few others to help put this group together. We put some staff members, some community members, some students even who 2 are graduating. 1 has already graduated because we wanted people who are older, who had more experiences and understood the landscape of all of it to gather their understanding of things. We put this group together and did a little bit of both information sharing as well as information gathering. And coming out of that, it came down to 5 things we really wanted to explore. One was student empowerment. How do we really grow our students and develop our students? The other was professional development, and how do we develop our professionals, obviously around the context of equity and diversity issues. And then leadership development. How do we develop our leaders? And then obviously looking at our human resources and things we do, which actually I will say, and I'm sure you'll hear about this, if not today, in coming podcast, Mesquite ISD really is leading in that arena more so than people understand. And then communication. How effective are we at communicating the things that are going on around these issues of equity and diversity inside our community? And obviously this podcast is one of those efforts.
I know you talk about our leadership development, and I know one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit in our committee is the Holdsworth work. Could you go into a little detail of what the Holdsworth work is and how equity is influenced by that?
Right. Well, the district was selected, I guess about 2 years ago by Holdsworth for training in leadership development, but its whole focus being on student equity and excellence. That's the focus of Holdsworth. And we were selected amongst hundreds of districts that applied. We're very excited to be selected. As a part of this process, what we look at is identifying our processes for selecting leaders, our processes for developing leaders, and that includes really identifying leaders who meet all sorts of profiles, racial profiles as well as gender profiles, right? So you're looking at a number of things, and in our district, what we determined is we've done a pretty good job, especially over the last 5 years, in elevating people of different race profiles into positions of leadership in our district, and very proud of that. That being said, one of the things we were concerned about is our development process, and are we developing people that match the student demographic or the student profile of our district as much as we would like? And we knew we weren't, and so we went about really working on processes to help make that a reality. I'm excited about where we're going. We've got a profile that we've developed that will help individuals actually cast their own path through leadership development. So it's no longer reliant upon a person identifying them now. It's more about the individual having access to this profile development tool and going in and developing their own leadership, and then collaborating with key leaders on their campus to continue to grow and evolve inside this profile. And the profile really looks at a multitude of leadership attributes and then sets about resources for people to use to continue to evolve in their growth. And then we as a district can track that evolution and we can support that. And so for me, that's very exciting. We actually call the tool Leadership Through Ownership, which fits our culture, which we talk about an ownership culture here. But what I most like about it is it limits access to leadership development to no one. Everyone has access to the tool. So it's not relying upon Dave Runlin identifying you as a potential leader. Now it's really about you seeing opportunity, and you can explore your leadership development in anonymity, or you can do it collaboratively. But either way, we're able to support that and able to even track that in data. And therefore, we can see potential identification of really outstanding leaders through that process rather than them meeting some kind of predetermined profile in my head, if that makes sense. And everybody does this. If it's based on what's in your head, it's most likely to be someone who's like you. And I don't mean just in racial makeup. I mean in personality, in their thinking. And that's not the best for an organization to have that kind of thinking going on. So we're very excited about this tool. We've been developing it for the last year and a half. So we were developing it well in advance of the circumstances in Minneapolis. But it became more important as the George Floyd, or the experiences coming out of George Floyd's death kind of exploded on the national scene.
I'm curious because you mentioned you were too young to really experience the civil rights movement, but then you mentioned 5 incidents over your adult life that you've, from your perspective as an educator, when you see something like what happened to George Floyd, what are you thinking, especially as the leader of this school district? What's going through your mind?
How's it affecting my kids? That's all I think about. It's how is it affecting them in terms of their mindset? How's it affecting them in terms of their sense of self? I mean, these are things that really concern me. And how does it potentially divide my children? When I say my children, I mean my kiddos in Mesquite ISD. How does it potentially do that? Those are the things that deeply concern me as an educator. And then as a history or social studies teacher myself, having taught psychology, sociology, government, history, as someone who's done that, all I want to do is frame up their minds in such a way that they can be in control of themselves as they move into a world that's filled with issues and lead in that world. I mean, that for me is an educational responsibility. I know, sometimes we want leaders like myself to come out and make political statements and things like that, but and I'm not opposed to that, so I don't want that to sound like that's not important. But what's most important is how are we developing our children and our adults such that when our kiddos leave our system, they're in control of the quality of their freedom. That's what we talk about in this district. That's our purpose. Everybody in the district understands that purpose. I think sometimes we lose track of what we're about, and when we do, we don't understand when situations like this arise, what is our role? And my role, specifically as superintendent of schools, is to put systems in place to make certain that our children, when they leave, they have the ability to be in control of the quality of their freedom. And to me, that looks like understanding our national landscape and being able to operate within that and potentially change it if you're that kind of leader, and change it for the positive. One of the things that I get frustrated by is the negativity around it. It's like, I get it, and so I don't want to say it's not valid. But what I want to suggest is we've got to think more positively about each other. I'm frustrated by the fact that we tend to see the worst in each other these days rather than the best in each other.
One of the things that we've emphasized on the LET committee is our student voices. Can you talk just a bit about how we use student voice or had student voice as a part of the committee work?
Yeah, and it was actually kind of exciting. I think we leaned on them quite a bit more than we did the adults, because it's about them. So we wanted to understand what their perspectives of issues in school were like. Not so much outside of school, a little bit, but mostly inside of school. What was it like? Were you able to have these conversations around issues of race, around issues of equity, around bias, whatever it may be that you kind of wanted to, were you able to have those conversations? And then if not, why? And if so, why? You know, it's like, what condition made it a safe space for those conversations? What didn't? What surprised us, frankly, and Daniel, you may be leading towards this, I think so, is that the students were more concerned about their fellow peers than they were about our adults. And that was communicated by all three of the students on the panel. It was very clearly they were concerned about ramifications, and I think it primarily centered in social media, if they were to express thoughts. And we realized at that point we've got to do more to develop safe spaces for students to have communications with students. You know, now they did say some adults are reticent to have the conversations. They're uncomfortable or concerned, but we did not pick up anything that really talked to adults being biased or doing things that hurt children. We didn't pick that up at all from our students. It isn't to say that doesn't exist, but that was not the preponderance of the issue. The issue centered around how to help students have conversations in a safe space with other students. And I guess in today's world, that makes sense. It's just I'm an older guy, as we noted at the beginning of this podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I don't think in social media concepts like our younger kids do, who that's a prevailing part of their life. So, but I was really impressed by their ad value. I was surprised by a couple comments in there. One of which is one student said they had these kind of conversations at home, and school was not a place where they wanted to have a whole lot of conversations about it. I was like, oh, wow. You know, so you pick up information from students you don't expect. But it really helped guide our processes a great deal. And I don't know if we're going to talk about the student program or not, but it helped guide our thoughts on how we develop our students in a way that honors what these students shared with us. So very excited about what we're looking at for the future as it relates to student development and not just our leadership development and professional development.
The LET committee, the leadership and empowerment team, was formed right after George Floyd's death. But you said for about a year and a half, the district has been talking about making these types of changes. Specifically for educators and for administrators, what will there be big changes or will these be slight changes?
I guess it depends on your perspective on that. I would say they're pretty significant changes, especially the student development piece. The professional development piece, I think we're going to follow a different path than you've traditionally seen, which is driven by policy, which is what we talked about at the beginning. It's like we're going to mandate certain trainings, we're going to mandate certain outcomes. My experience of those mandates is they have not succeeded, as I said earlier, in changing hearts and minds. So the professional development path will be more about how you create tipping points and cultural change rather than just simply policy mandates, which I fear a policy mandate would not have the effect we want it to have. It's simple for me to create a policy mandate. It's actually the easiest thing for me to do. But I say to our leaders all the time, the right thing is often challenged by the easy thing. And I don't want us to fall into the temptation of believing we're actually having impact by simply designing some policies. We talk about impact all the time in this district. Everything is centered around having impact. We pull from John Wooden's a statement that we never mistake activity for achievement. And so just by policies are activities essentially. And if we're trying to achieve a mindset change, then we need to think differently than that. And so our professional development path is, I think, unique, and I'm excited by it. It will take a couple years to have its effect, but I think when it has its effect, it will be significant. I think, Mr. Norwood, would you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely would.
Yeah.
Knowing Jennifer Morris and some of the folks who are involved in our professional learning part and the book studies that we've chosen to do, I think will definitely have an impact on that next level beyond policy, which we talk about, which is changing culture.
Exactly. So for those who don't know, in our professional development piece, we actually have essentially 3 components. The first component is for all new staff coming into the district. Jennifer Morris and her staff will be working with all new staff in the district for 2 years. That's already a part of our training process. And integrated into that will be issues related to teaching in diverse communities, and teaching in understanding one's biases in their teaching. So that'll be a part of the training. It won't be a segmented piece. It'll be a part of their overall training as they're learning to become teachers in Mesquite ISD. And every new teacher has to go through that in our district. That process has been in place for the last 2 years, I believe.
So.
But now we're adding this component to it. Then on top of that, we are putting together, I guess what you would call, my wife called it evangelist, but we're putting together teams of evangelists on campuses who have passions around this issue, and we're going to deeply train them. And it's through them we'll create tipping points of culture on campuses rather than mandating everyone go through the same experience. And then the latter will be the people who we've, based on evaluation, determined they need some specialized training because they may be falling short in some respects. And so we'll provide training for them like we do for anyone in an evaluation process. We provide various trainings. Now we're focused in this area as well. So a 3-part piece of professional development will be incorporated. The student piece is the most exciting to me, though.
You talk about breaking patterns, and one thing we know about breaking patterns is that we have to impact our next generation. And so the Social Leadership Initiative, I know, is a big part of the work that we're doing. It's part of the 5 tiers. How do you see this playing a role in disrupting patterns?
Oh, my goodness. So I just, when you and I and Mr. Sarpy really started processing this, it was like, to me, it got me very excited for our young people and for what our district can do in terms of leading an initiative around this, right? Really being innovative around how do you change patterns in the future. And that is our students, right? That's how do we develop our students around these issues. And again, you want to avoid mandates. Mandates don't fall within our culture anyway. We're an ownership culture, and we want our students to have ownership over their development as much as possible as well. So it's how do you do this within our cultural understanding? And what we started talking about was developing a social leadership path. And Daniel and I had a conversation recently, even call it a school of leadership, like you might see in a college, right? But in our path, all students as 9th graders would have an opportunity to choose into the School of Leadership. Now they're going to take they could be in a science endorsement. It doesn't matter what endorsement they're in. They follow their endorsement. They follow that learning. But in the School of Leadership, they will have to do some added components to their learning. And so as a 9th grader, I believe most students will take world geography as 9th graders as an example. So as you're taking world geography, one of the things we're going to ask you to do is within the frame of that, develop a side portfolio if you're in the School of Leadership. And so you'll have the School of Leadership portfolio. And in that portfolio, you will be showing examples of key leadership throughout the world and how that influences your thinking. And then you'll be cohorted with kids, virtually cohorted with kids and a teacher to basically go through a discussion around leadership. So imagine if you're cohorted, you do this 4 times a year. So you're going to select 4 key leaders out of world geography, but you're cohorted with 8 other kids. And by the way, we want these leaders to represent different groups of people, diverse groups of people, right? So, and Daniel will be working on developing this, but so imagine if you're cohorted with 8 other kids and you've developed 4, they've each developed 4. There's a potential of 32 key leader conversations that are going to happen And they're doing this as ninth graders. Then as 10th graders in American history, they're doing the same thing. And then they're doing it in government. And they're developing different kind of people as they go through. Their understanding of key leaders and their contextual leadership and how it influences them then in their senior year culminates with a class that is on current issues and leadership. And so you've moved through world, U.S. history, U.S. government to current leadership. And what we're trying to do is then recognize these students who graduate from our schools having gone through this path as graduates of our School of Leadership as well. And so cord them, let them put it on their resume. What we're trying to do is develop these young people. And it doesn't matter if they're advanced students or not advanced students. It doesn't matter. They're all taking U.S. history. Some might be AP history, some might be regular history, but they're all taking it. And so we get a chance to develop these people, these young people, intentionally as leaders. And we're not inculcating our thought. That's not our responsibility as education people. Our job as educators is to provide opportunities for them to develop their thinking. We have not, in my experience in schools, ever been this intentional about developing leaders. And so for me, this is really key as we're developing future leaders who are going to lead change. And I know some people kind of repulse at change, but I like to say it's not just death and taxes that are inevitable. Change is inevitable as well. And so you might as well be in front of it or be a victim of it. And so for us, we want to train our children to be in front of it, to lead that process rather than to be victims of it. And so I'm really excited about this development process. It's in its infancy, but I think it could be a powerful game changer for our students. And again, going back to our purpose, it fits our purpose. It puts our children in better situations to be in control of the quality of their freedom. And that's our purpose dating back to 1810. So I'm very excited about it. I can't wait till we start seeing the first fruits of this with our children. But we also have said at graduation we want to recognize them. And this will set a precedent because we don't do this. So this should signify how important it is to us.
Developing that leadership program sounds like a lot of work. Hopefully Dr. V didn't just broadside you with that. You knew this was coming?
No, I knew it was coming.
He
We were
was
part of the
complicit.
process.
Yeah, I mean, he agrees with this. So
It's
We're part of
ambitious,
the
though,
process,
but
yeah.
it's very ambitious. And then, as you said, it's very intentional.
It's very intentional to develop our young people. And I can't emphasize enough for the community that hears this. Again, it's not for us to inculcate our thoughts. As educators, that should never be our position on current issues or not. Our position is to force our children to think, to move past emotion, to really dig deep into issues and understand them from the complexities that they are. And I learn as I go through this. I was sharing with Daniel, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Harriet, but it's a really good movie about Harriet Tubman, and it's accurate. And one of the things that struck me, I'd taught history for a number of years. It's interesting how we teach people. And I taught Harriet Tubman as a figure, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, like others. Taught them as figures, as key figures. We talked about them. But it occurred to me as I watched that movie, it was like, no, she wasn't a figure. She was a leader in her time, in her place. And we need to teach her as such. We need people to see her as our young people to see her as a leader in her time, right? I mean, she wasn't an elected leader. She actually led a charge, but she wasn't a general in the way that we generally kind of think of leaders in history. She didn't meet those profiles. She didn't affect policy decisions, but she definitely was a leader in her time. She had influence over other leaders as well. So I think for us, that was for me an aha moment. It's like how we teach about figures in history. We need to be really emphasizing that they weren't just figures; they were leaders. Like women's suffrage movement, leaders. Like in some of the leaders in the union movement, leaders. I mean, these are leaders. These aren't just figures, right? They were leaders in their time, and we need to represent them as so, even if they are controversial leaders. The Tammany Hall stuff and things like that. We could expose our children to controversial leaders as well as kind of embrace leaders and help them better understand the nature of that leadership and better understand how it might influence them.
So, Dr. V, we came up with we had our committee, and I know we met a few times before we actually had a name. And can you talk a little bit more about Leadership Empowerment Team, how we got to that to let committee?
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of one of my conditions. Again, breaking patterns. I didn't want to name this committee. That was not my intention. That was not my desire. But I wanted to make certain we just didn't name it like every other district has for the last 20 years, the Diversity and Equity Committee, because that leads to certain mindsets immediately. If I name it that, there's certain people who are really excited about that get certain thoughts in their head as to what that committee is going to do. And if I name it, certain people who aren't excited about that get other thoughts in their heads about what that committee is going to do. And again, if you're going to break mindsets, you got to think about your language and how that affects how people respond. And so I only put that condition. And it doesn't mean we're going to not deal with issues of diversity and equity. The committee is intended to hold us accountable to the plans we've developed. So we're going to deal with it, but we need to think about it differently. And so after we designed some of these strategies, the team then started brainstorming, and Jennifer and Daniel led them in that process, but they started brainstorming, well, what would the name be? And it really was a difficult thing for them at first because they just wanted to instinctually fall on easy. And then they started thinking about what we were doing, and they realized we're helping develop leaders, both in our personnel in our district, as well as in our students. We're trying to empower people. And so that's where it came from. And it really was students who drove it. I think 2 students specifically kind of drove the initial concept, and then we dug through it, and it ended up the Leadership and Empowerment Team. And, we're going to be evolving this team, but the team's purpose will be the same regardless of how it evolves. And it will be to make certain that the district is reporting to someone, these are the things that are going on. From a policy standpoint, we have human resources, and we actually have some outstanding processes in place already. And Mary Randall, our head of human resources, has done a terrific job there and shared with this group. But we haven't communicated that very well. So that's one thing we need to do. But also, we need to make certain that we're held to a high standard, and we hold ourselves to a high standard. Remember, we're about ownership. And so what we're doing is putting a team in place that we can communicate through and be asked questions through. Are we holding ourselves to this standard? And then the same with our professional development, the same with our leadership development, and the same with our student development. And so very excited about the leadership and empowerment team, and just really looking forward to seeing how this continues to grow and evolve over time. But I think we had a great start already, and we're in motion. So as people should know in this district, when I commit to something and set out to do it, it gets in motion quickly. It's not a matter of we'll talk about it for a long time. Let's go get the work done. And so you're right, I've put a lot on Daniel, but Daniel is well up to this challenge. He has the skill sets to get it done, and we have the people in the district committed to the ideals of this. So I'm not really terribly worried about moving forward. I'm excited about moving forward. And my encouragement through all of this was the way in which the committee treated each other. It was a very, very positive environment. And for me, this is the most important thing. As we're dealing with these issues, we have to have a little bit more faith in each other. It saddens me when we approach it from a place of suspicion and negativity. We need to have a little bit more trust and a little bit more optimism about what each of us is trying to do. We may have different views on how to get there, but we all want to get to this place where all of our children are in control of the quality of their freedom when they leave our system.
Well, the committee's in motion, and thanks for helping us get this podcast in motion. Episode 1 in the books. Appreciate it, Dr. V.
Sounds good.
Appreciate him joining us and for launching this new initiative, this new committee, the Leadership and Empowerment Team. Next week, we'll visit with Mesquite High School librarian Amy Ann Bailey. If you follow her on social media, you know how open and outspoken she has been about racial issues in our country, and she will talk about how reading can help, even while a lot of our books we offer need to change. For Daniel Norwood, I'm Ted Madden. Let's talk again next week.